Hello there viewers, and welcome to the third and final part of the Formula 1 Talk 2012 season review, in which we will take a look at the low end of the grid order, specifically looking at the Sauber, Toro Rosso, Williams, Caterham, Marussia and Hispania racing teams. Now, I know it's double the amount of teams that I've looked at in previous instalments, but the mere fact the three newer teams did next to nothing this year means there wasn't much reason to give them their own video. So we'll now get on with part 3, beginning with the Sauber F1 team. And the Sauber C31 looked impressive in testing, add that to their stability in retaining their two young hungry drivers from the 2011 season, and you had a recipe for a decent season. A double points finish in Australia was followed by the team's highlight of the year in Malaysia, where Sergio Perez finished second to Alonso in terrible weather conditions. He would have won the race if not for a mistake on the final lap. They weren't so hot for the next two races, but consistent point scoring across the board, including podiums, assured us all that Sauber were well and truly back to where they were before being purchased by BMW in 2005. We'll take a look at the season of Japanese driver Kamui Kobayashi, and the excitable and popular Kobayashi, who has thrilled us since late 2009, did so again with daring passes that deflected his so-called inexperience in the sport. Of course, it helped his season to a certain degree that his teammate was getting all of the attention. This means he could concentrate on his own driving. However, scoring a few DNFs and out of the points finishes eventually took away some impressive point-scoring drives, including a fourth in Germany, a fifth in Spain, and the most popular podium finish of the season, where he took a well-deserved third place at his home Grand Prix of Japan in Suzuka. Sadly, despite these impressive results, he has failed to secure a seat in the hotly contested musical chairs game for 2013, and will be looking to gain sponsorship so he can come back in 2014. All in all, he's had a rather good season, and in my opinion clearly obviously not as good as his teammate, but still deserves a decent score from me of 6 out of 10. On to Mexican Sergio Perez now, and the crash at Monaco in 2011 seemed to do the youngster a lot of good, seeing how he used his brain and took the next race off to fully recover from his concussive-like state. Vowing to do much better in 2012, Checo did just that, for the first half of the season at least. A good 8th to begin the season was eclipsed by his performance in Malaysia, finishing second in the rain. A third in Canada and a second in Italy led the mighty McLaren team to choose young Perez to replace the outgoing Lewis Hamilton at the working base squad for the 2013 season onwards. The Ferrari team were also interested in the youngster, but re-signed Felipe Massa, instead believing Sergio to be too inexperienced for the team. The announcement of this huge news seemed to, however, destroy the rest of Sergio's season, as after the said news, he did not score another point for the rest of the year, and took too many chances to pass others, as if he were trying to impress his new and future employers. McLaren will be hoping for better reliability from the Mexican for 2013, but as for 2012, I'll have to give him a score that reflects his year, which is a 7.5 out of 10. Now on to the second of the 6 teams we'll look at this time around, and they are the Scuderia Torro Rosso team. And to my shock, and no doubt many others as well up and down the paddock, the team decided not to continue their efforts with drivers Sebastian Buemi and Jaime Alguersuari, instead replacing them with Red Bull prodigy Daniel Ricciardo and Frenchman Jean-Eric Vergne. This gamble began well with a points finish in each of the first 2 races. However, the STR7 then soon began the team's usual period of ineffectiveness, not scoring a single point for the next 10 races. The team was battling the Mercedes pair for much of the season, with Jean-Eric Vergne being involved with crashes with Michael Schumacher at least twice throughout the year. The progress was slow, but they performed better after the mid-season break, twice scoring a double points finish, but nothing higher than an 8th place all year long. They retained both drivers for 2013, but continuing at their current pace, it's going to be a tough year for them. Now for their drivers, beginning with the young Australian Daniel Ricciardo, and many believe that his roots with Red Bull were the reason that he was in the team. In my personal opinion, he should have been a test driver this year to Buemi and Alguersuari, but under the leadership of Franz Tost, he was maturing all season. The car didn't enable him to shine and consistently score unlike his predecessors. 6 points finishes still cannot take away from the dismal start to the year, so a score of 4 out of 10 is all I can give him. Dare I say, things will and can only get better. His teammate Jean-Eric Vergne now, and the Frenchman finished runner-up in the 2011 Formula 3.5 series, earning his way into Formula 1 at the expense of more experienced talent. However, he took an 11th place in his debut race and followed up with an 8th in Malaysia, not scoring again until Spa with another 8th place. Incidentally, his other 2-point scoring races were in Korea and Brazil, again taking an 8th place in both of them. As a result, he finished above Ricciardo in the drivers' standings. With this in mind, I'll give him a slightly higher score of 4.5 out of 10. We now move to the Williams F1 team now, and by retaining Venezuelan Pastor Maldonado and bringing in Brazilian Bruno Senna, Formula 1 said a fond farewell to F1 stalwart Rubens Barrichello, who has moved on to the American IndyCar Championship. This marked a return to the Renault engines, also reuniting a team that once struck fear into their rivals. The mighty Williams Renault package was responsible for 3 drivers and 3 constructors' titles in the early to mid-90s. But the team knew it would be a miracle to see those days return this season at the very least. Things started off badly as both drivers failed to complete the first race in Melbourne. Respectable points finishes in Malaysia and China brought the team more points in the first 3 races than they had scored in the whole of the 2011 season. Things got better still as Maldonado secured pole position in Spain after Lewis Hamilton was disqualified from the results of Q3 for insufficient fuel reserves. Maldonado then took a fantastic lights-to-flag victory, keeping Fernando Alonso behind him for the majority of the race with some excellent tyre management. A fire in the garage spoilt their celebrations, but the team was well and truly back on the top step of the podium for the first time since Brazil 2004, where Juan Pablo Montoya won in the revised Williams. Then the tide seemed to turn on the Oxford-based squad as high-end point scores were few and far between. Maldonado's win in Spain was overshadowed by his seemingly endless run of incidents and accidents, many resulting in him retiring from races or him being punished by the stewards. They ended the season with a whimper, which was a little disappointing considering the race win and the fact that Senna was scoring points in the majority of the races, but no high-end scores. As for 2013, Senna has been replaced by Finnish testing sensation Valtteri Bottas, who has been tipped by many to be the new Mika Hakkinen. With a prediction like that, who knows what heights Williams will reach in 2013. Onto the season fortunes and misfortunes of Pastor Maldonado now, and the Venezuelan was now a team leader in Formula 1 despite his relative inexperience. He took his FW34 and looked rather impressive in testing, and looked good too in Australia before he crashed out in the final few laps of the race. But he was being outscored by his teammate Bruno Senna until his unbelievable weekend in Spain, where he took an inherited pole position and took the race win from the start. This win seemed to go to his head, aiming for passes in the subsequent races where the moves weren't really on, taking out championship contenders and backmarkers alike. By the halfway point of the season, he only had 2 points finishes to his name. The other result of favour for Pastor was a 5th in Abu Dhabi, but for a man who was showing the speed necessary to return his team to the front of the grid after all of these years of insufficient results, Maldonado must control his, what I call, a red mist, and learn from his 2012 mistakes. With his new Finnish teammate next season, the pressure will be on for him to deliver in 2013 and on a more consistent basis. His race seat, however, is probably one of the safest on the grid, as financial backing comes from the Venezuelan government itself, so technically he doesn't have to worry about leaving Formula 1 anytime soon. Despite the win and some other small flashes of brilliance, I have to take into consideration the accidents and incidents when giving him my score for this year's efforts, which in my case is a 6.5 out of 10. We now move to Bruno Senna as the nephew of the great 3-time world champion Ayrton Senna was now with the team his uncle was driving for in his final races. But looking to the future, young Bruno began his season well, outscoring his more experienced teammate in the first few races. However, Maldonado's victory in Spain seemed to stop Bruno in his tracks. Despite the name Senna, the young Brazilian could not score any better than a 6th place finish all season long, and scored more points on a more consistent basis than Maldonado. A spin during qualifying at Spa showed the world that the pressure was getting to him, and with Valtteri Bottas breathing down his neck for the race seat for 2013, sadly for Bruno, his luck was out. As I write and record this video he's in the running for one of the 3 remaining seats for 2013, and only one of those seats would enhance his career. He needs a team that would build his confidence and one that would actually keep him on for more than one season. For that reason and the fact that the pressure got to him this year, it's difficult to say whether he will be in F1 for 2013. It also influences my score for the Brazilian for 2012, which is a 5 out of 10. On to the Caterham F1 team now, and finally, after a couple of years of battling with certain parties over the right to use the name Lotus in Formula 1, Tony Fernandes has decided to use the name Caterham F1 for his founded team. Named after the sports car manufacturer he purchased in mid-2011, Caterham could finally concentrate on the job at hand. 2011 also marked the last hurrah for another long-time F1 servant in Jarno Trulli, as he was replaced in the early months of the year by Russian Vitaly Petrov, who brought in some much-needed sponsorship to the team. A step in the right direction was the inclusion of the KERS boost system to their cars for 2012, added to their now usage of Renault engines, and it looked like the team was ready to score its first points since coming into the sport in 2010. However, reality was not so forgiving. In testing, the car wasn't up to speed, and it was only just able to out-qualify the Marussias of Charles Pic and Timo Glock. This pattern would continue as they struggled to keep the black and red cars behind them for the majority of the year, struggling to even finish in the top 15 in most races. But it was only in the final race of the season where they gained the necessary 11th place to retain their position in the Constructors' Championship. At the time of writing, Frenchman Charles Pic has signed for 12-13, but his teammate has yet to be announced. We now look at the season of the Finn Heikki Kovalainen, and from the start Heikki felt it was going to be a tough year as he was outpaced by his new teammate in the first 3 races. Better results in Spain and Monaco didn't take away from the fact that the car was slow compared to the performance of previous years. More often than not, Kovalainen was outraced by his Russian teammate, and sadly for Heikki, this seems to be the final year he will compete in Formula 1. His performances have not been brilliant, and there are more exciting and younger prospects with better sponsorship coming through the pipeline. And in these days where every penny is vital, especially for some teams lower down the order like Caterham, drivers like Kovalainen are going to be a thing of the past. As for his score for 2012, I have to be honest and give a lower score, as there were no points to speak of, and he was beaten 10 times by his teammate. A sad case, but a score of 3.5 out of 10. We'll take a peek at the season of the Russian Vitaly Petrov, and he was ready to prove himself after being released from his former Renault, now Lotus F1 contract. Immediately he was made an impact, settling into his new team by beating his new teammate in each of the first 3 races. Down the lower end of the paddock, this is all a driver can aim for. This train continued on for much of the season as he beat Heikki Kovalainen in the inter-team battle for supremacy 10 times. But more importantly for the team, it was Petrov who scored the much-needed 11th place in Brazil to keep them in 10th place in the Constructors' Championship for this season. This gives them a bigger share of the prize money and enables the team to improve. Petrov is still waiting, as we all are, for the decisions to be made about his immediate future regarding 2013. But for 2012, I'll give him a slightly higher score than his teammate because of the 11th place in Brazil, a 4 out of 10. Onto the Marussia F1 team now, and the team had changed their name from Virgin Formula 1 before the season had got underway. They retained German Timo Glock and had brought in Frenchman Charles Pic for the 2012 season. Thanks to their aerodynamic changes with assistance from the McLaren wind tunnel, the MR01 was faster than the 2012 Caterham for much of the season, with Glock scoring a fantastic 12th place finish in Singapore. However, fate yet again turned on the Marussia team, and they were demoted to 11th in the constructors' standings in the final race in Brazil. On to German Timo Glock now, and in what proved to be his last season in Formula 1, his team, which he had been assisting since they came into the sport in 2010, finally had some speed in the off-season. He was more often than not out-racing the Caterhams in pure speed battles on track, but sadly for him and the other 5 newer team cars, it was a case of more of the same, as they were in the middle of their individual squabbles with each other, but letting the leaders pass them more often than not. My score for Timo, who probably had the best season of the 6 lower drivers, I'll be generous and give him a score of 5.5 out of 10. The Frenchman Charles Pic is our focus now, and the youngster had the unenviable task of being a new driver with a low-end motor racing team, which is something that can make or break your career. He started off well, scoring a 15th place finish in the opening round in Melbourne, but soon found himself under the curse of the lower end teams, as he failed to get a decent result or even finish in the next 6 races. A return to 15th place in Valencia saw his fortunes change, but it was his more experienced teammate that was getting the better results. Still, a teammate best equalling result at Brazil saw him end his season on a higher note, with a 12th place. Also earning him a seat at rivals Caterham for the 2013 season means we'll see Charles peak next season, but with a new team. As for this year and my score for him, he performed as well as expected in all honesty, all but for his last race in Brazil where he outperformed his machinery, so I will give him a 4.5 out of 10 for his efforts. On to our final team in this video and the review in general, the Hispania Racing Team, or HRT for short, were yet again the final team that were prepared for the 2012 season. A failure in one of their crash tests put them back a couple of weeks, and they barely got any pre-season testing done, despite doing more than the Mercedes team itself. HRT failed to qualify within the 107% time rule for the first race for the second season in a row, and as a result they did not compete in the first race at Melbourne despite an appeal. They qualified for the remaining 19 races of the season, which was a step in the right direction. Yet again it was a case of more of the same as the past 2 or 3 years, but what more can you expect of your two drivers when one of them was an excellent test driver but not known as a race driver, and the other is the worst driver in the history of the sport. The team finally had a purpose-built base in Madrid built, and things were looking good for the future. However, despite all efforts to save the team or sell the team, in December 2012 it was announced that they went into liquidation, and thus ends another dream in Formula 1. On to Pedro Della Rosa now, and even he wasn't expecting miracles in 2012, but he was now the team leader of his national team based in his own capital of Madrid. Believe it or not, that was the high point of his and their season. On track he was doing the best he could with the worst machinery in the paddock. What made things worse was the fact that he didn't even get the highest place finish for the team. That went to his teammate. As a result of his horrid season and the fact his F1 career is in extreme doubt, I can only give him a 3 out of 10. That's being very kind indeed. And finally, the Indian driver Narain Karthikeyan, who in my opinion is the worst driver in the history of Formula 1. He spent most of his time in 2012 looking in his mirrors and driving slowly. He was blamed by Sebastian Vettel for their incident in Malaysia, which they made contact. He was slow too in Abu Dhabi when Nico Rosberg in the Mercedes was catching him at a fast rate of knots after a pit stop. In all honesty, this was the result of only to crash into the Indian, causing one of the moments of the race itself. His highlight of the year and possibly his career was a 15th place finish at Monaco, but in all honesty that was the result of a race of attrition. I for one am glad to see the back of Karthikeyan, and no doubt are some of the other drivers in the sport. For 2012 I can only give him a 2.5 out of 10. So there you have it. There is my review of the 2012 F1 season in 3 parts, and to be honest I know I should have posted these ASAP, but as I said last time out, there were unavoidable events in the past month, so they had to take precedence, so I again apologise for that. Up next on the channel is the news from the past few weeks and a redesign of the format of the videos on this channel, which should hopefully give me more time to work on them. So until then, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.